Okay, everyone, after our lesson which involved the relative clauses, I thought I'd just give you a few sentences with examples of these relative clauses. The important thing with the relative pronoun is to remember that it does not go in the same case as necessarily as the noun that it describes. It goes in the same number, as in singular or plural. It goes in the same gender, as in masculine, feminine, or neuter, but it does not necessarily have to be in the same case as the noun that it describes. It goes in the case that is required in that particular clause. So the first sentence, de lector libro quem ad me misisti. This first bit then you've got is de lector, that is a present passive. I am being pleased by the book, quem, which you sent to me. Now, if we look at this relative clause here, the quem, if we look at this, we'll notice that is accusative masculine singular. Except libro, the word that it's describing, is not accusative masculine singular. Libro is going to be ablative, because it is obviously an ablative instrument. I'm being pleased by the book. So I'm being pleased by the book. Now imagine if the book was repeated in the second clause. You sent me which book? Then obviously it would need to be the accusative. So I'm being pleased by the book, quem, which you sent to me. The second sentence. Poeni montibus qui altiores erant Pyrenees terebantur. The Carthaginians were being terrified by the mountains, qui, which were higher than the Pyrenees. You've got there the Carthaginians, terebantur, imperfect passive, were being terrified, montibus, by the mountains, qui, which, so the qui is referring to the mountains, but again, in this context, the qui is going to be nominative, even though the montibus is going to be ablative, and that's because in the context of this particular clause, it is the subject of its clause, the mountains which were higher than the Pyrenees. 3. Androclus recognized the lion whose life he had saved. So the lion is accusative, but it's the lion of whom he had saved the life. The relative pronoun is the queus, genitive singular. The next sentence. Multae evis quas Romani muniverunt hodie supersunt. Many of the roads survive today, quas, which the Romans built. So many from the streets, many from the roads, we'll say, sounds better here, many of the roads which the Romans built are surviving today. So the quas here is the relative pronoun, and it is going to be many of the streets the Romans built which, so it's going to be accusative plural. The next part is Romani. The Romans arrived at the clearing in which the Samnites were waiting for them. So here, the ad saltum pervenerunt is going to be the Romans arrived at the clearing in which the Samnites were waiting for them. I've just checked. It's got saltus as being pass or clearing. I wasn't sure if clearing was the correct word here, and I think it's fine. The Romans arrived at the clearing in which the Samnites were waiting for them. The saltum there is going to be accusative, but it's in which. Again, the relative pronoun there is going to be in the ablative. Duces, the leaders with whom they were proceeding, duxerunt, led the Romans into an ambush. So, the quibus in that context, the relative pronoun there, is going to be in the ablative, even though it's described in the duces, which are the nominative. So the leaders with whom they were proceeding led the Romans into an ambush. Of course, it could still be the leaders who were proceeding led the Romans, and then it would be the nominative. But here it's the leaders with whom they were proceeding. Remember, it needs to go in the case that is required in that particular clause. Milites, the soldiers, culpabant, were blaming the consuls, to whom mandaverunt, they had entrusted their safety. The quibus there is going to be a dative relative clause, different obviously to the milites, the consuls there. So consules is going to be the accusative because it's the object of they were blaming the consuls, but the quibus is going to be to whom they had entrusted. The next bit, etiam e elephanti. Even those elephants who had fallen into the
water, ewaserunt, escaped onto the bank. Even those elephants who had fallen into the river escaped into the bank. So, even those elephants. Qui here is the nominative of the relative pronoun. Even those elephants who had fallen into the river escaped into the bank. Pontius constituit consulere. Pontius decided to consult his father. Patrem there is accusative, obviously with the em ending. Qui, though, is going to be nominative, who was now an old man, because it's the subject of that particular sentence. Romani paruerunt. The Romans paruerunt, obeyed the advice, took the advice, gave obedience to the advice, quod, which Lentulus proposed. The advice there is going to be the dative, it's the object of pareo, I obey, I give obedience to, I adhere to, quod, which Lentulus proposed. This next page, which you can pause, gives you information, if you require it, on the relative pronoun. And now, more exercises to make sure that you absolutely understand it. Pause it, obviously, and then once you've finished translating it, go through it with me. Hannibal, when ditabat, was selling the pubs, which were now around the forum. The tabernas, accusative, but in the context of this next clause, it is he was selling the pubs which were now around. It's going to be nominative of the relative pronoun. The next bit. Milites. The soldiers were taking ladders to the wall, which they had prepared. The soldiers were portabant, were carrying with them ladders to the wall, which they had maybe got ready, we would say there, for parabant, rather than they had prepared. I'm not sure exactly how you can prepare a ladder, but we'll say that. The soldiers were carrying ladders with them to the wall, which they had got ready. So the quas there is going to be the relative pronoun, and it is obviously going to be accusative plural, feminine accusative plural, feminine plural, because scalas is feminine plural, and it's also going to be in the same case, because it's the object of that particular clause, in the same way that scalas is the object of its particular clause. Muri instructi erant tormentis. The walls had been equipped with tormentis, with engines, I suppose we could say, with siege engines, which Archimedes had found. The quae there is going to be nominative plural. The walls had been equipped with siege engines, which Archimedes had found. Dies, the day on which Diana was being celebrated, was now present. The dies quo, the day on which, quo there is our relative pronoun, time when ablative, so it's going to be in the ablative case. Romam ipsam ad quam tandem pervenerat Hannibal spectabat. Hannibal was looking at Rome itself, to which he had at last arrived. Hannibal was watching Rome itself, where he had at last arrived at. So, ad quam, the quam referring to the Romam, and that is our relative pronoun there. It's part, obviously, of the relative clause. The next bit. E quibus consules credebat falsa naraverunt. They, whom the consuls trusted, had told falsehood, had told lies. Those to whom the consuls had given their trust had told falsehoods. The quibus there is the relative pronoun, dative following credebant, which obviously always takes the dative. Bellum, quod Romani cum Hannibale gerebant, longissimum erat. The war which the Romans were waging with Hannibal was longissimum, superlative there, was very long. The bellum, quod is our relative pronoun there. Accusative in this case, because it's the war the Romans were waging, which war with Hannibal. Poini ad locum. The Carthaginians arrived at the place, qui modo, which was only 3,000 miles from Rome. The qui there is the relative pronoun. The Carthaginians arrived at the place, which was only 3,000 paces. Did I say 3,000? Did I say 3,000 miles? If I did, I'm a fool. Sorry, which is only 3 miles from Rome. The qui there is obviously the relative pronoun. Classis, where we get the word classics from. In this context, though, it means fleet. Classis, the fleet, which the Carthaginians were expecting. The quam is obviously the relative pronoun, and again, it's going to be accusative singular. Even though classis is nominative, it's going to be the Carthaginians were expecting which non pervenit did not reach Syracuse. Archimedes, whose Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier by the plan of whom Syracuse had been defended. It's a difficult sentence there. I got a little muddled in my head even as I was doing it. Archimedes, Orchisos est, was killed by a Roman soldier, by the plan of whom, the quios there, this is a difficult one, the quios there is obviously genitive of the relative pronoun, Archimedes, by the plan of whom Syracuse had been, pluperfect passive, defended, was killed by a Roman soldier. And those are various different examples then of our relative clauses.